The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon, slipped under the door of my apartment like an afterthought. I nearly stepped on it, carried in with the pile of junk mail and flyers I usually tossed straight into the bin. It was heavier than most envelopes, cream-colored with gold trim, my name handwritten in a curling, deliberate script I didn't recognize. I turned it over in my hands, heart-catching before I even opened it. Inside was a folded card embossed with floral vines, the kind you'd find at a luxury wedding boutique. "The honor of your presence is requested at the union of Seraphina Vaughn and Nathaniel Creed," it read. The location, some private resort outside Asheville. The date, 3 weeks from now. 3 weeks. I stared at her name. My sister. My baby sister, Seraphina. I hadn't even known she was engaged. Dropping into the worn armchair beside the window, I read the card again. Then again. There was no mention of our parents, no note from her, just a generic RSVP line, and the phrase hosted by the Creed family. I rubbed my jaw, heart beginning to thrum. Creed. I knew that name. Anyone in North Carolina did. The Creeds ran a chain of private hospitals and clinics, owned real estate across 3 counties, and were often plastered across the business section for some donation or expansion. The kind of family who had monogrammed robes, estate gates, and long memories. And now my sister was marrying into them. I stared out the window for a while, my coffee cold on the table beside me. Seraphina was impulsive in some ways, creative, soft-hearted, quick to forgive, but she had always been honest with me. Always. I pulled out my phone and called her. It rang twice before she answered. "Elias, got your invitation." There was a pause, longer than it should have been. Then, "Oh, right. I wasn't sure if it had reached you yet. You're getting married in 3 weeks, I said slowly. That's fast. Yeah. Her voice was lighter than usual, like she was speaking through a smile she didn't feel. It's been a whirlwind. To Nathaniel Creed. Another pause. Yes, he proposed last month. Everything's moving kind of quickly, but it feels right. You sure about that? I asked. Because it doesn't sound like you. She let out a soft breath, not quite a laugh. They're just particular Elias. His family, I mean. They want things a certain way. Formal, structured. I leaned forward. You never cared about formal. I know. It's not about the ceremony. It's complicated. I let that hang there. She wasn't going to offer more, and I didn't want to push her, not yet. All right, I'll be there. Thanks, she said, but her voice was distant. It'll be nice to have you. Really. When we hung up, I sat there staring at the card again. My sister, whose idea of a good time was painting barefoot in the backyard, was having a high society wedding at a mountain resort run by people who cared more about bloodlines than love. It didn't add up. Something about the whole thing sat sideways in my gut. And when I folded the card and slid it back into its envelope, I knew I wasn't just going to show up as a guest. I was going to figure out what was going on. Even if Seraphina didn't want to say it out loud, yet I could hear the tension in her voice. Something was off, and it wasn't just the gold-trimmed invitation or the rushed timeline. 3 weeks later, I was driving through the fog-laced curves of the Blue Ridge Parkway, watching the sun bleed over the hills and trying to shake the feeling that I was walking into something far more complicated than a wedding. The resort rose out of the mist, like something from a film glass, and stone sprawling terraces and sharp lines that cut into the mountainside like it didn't care what nature had to say. Everything about it felt curated, cold, quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. The valet eyed my beat-up car like it had grown out of the asphalt, but he didn't say anything. Just nodded, took the keys, and disappeared with it behind a wall of luxury vehicles. Inside the lobby was a cathedral of marble and glass. A string quartet played in the corner, Guests in satin dresses and sharp tuxedos floated from room to room, champagne flutes in hand, laughing like they'd rehearsed it. I'd packed a black suit and decent shoes, but walking in I already felt underdressed. Not because of how I looked, but because I didn't belong. My parents were easy to spot, standing stiffly near a table of hors d'oeuvres, clearly trying not to touch anything. My mother, Delia, wore a faded blue dress she'd pulled out for Easter 2 years ago. My father, Leonard, had a sports jacket that fit fine when he bought it in 1997. They looked like visitors at a museum, quiet, polite, and a little afraid to breathe too loudly. "Elias," my mother said, relief softening her face when she saw me. "Thank God." My father shook my hand, eyes flicking over my suit like he was checking to see if I measured up. "Glad you made it." Before I could answer, a woman stepped into our little circle. Impeccably dressed in a pale gray sheath dress, her platinum hair sculpted into something architectural. Her lipstick was the same red as a stop sign, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You must be Elias," she said, extending a hand that felt like porcelain. "I'm Celeste Creed, Nathaniel's mother." "Pleasure," I said flatly. Her eyes swept over me. "Seraphina's brother. I've heard things." I didn't ask what things. I just held her gaze, waiting. She smiled again, tighter. "I do hope you'll feel comfortable this weekend. I know this environment can be unfamiliar." "My sister invited me," I replied. "That's all I need." She didn't respond, just turned to my mother and said, "It's always so heartening when both families try their best to rise to the occasion." My mother nodded with a smile that made her look like she was clenching her teeth. Celeste drifted away a moment later, a gust of perfume and powdered judgment trailing behind her. At dinner, things got worse. The Creed family sat at a long table draped in white silk center of the room under a massive chandelier. I was assigned to a corner table near the entrance with a few second cousins I hadn't seen in a decade. No one from our side was anywhere near the front. Nathaniel stood to give a toast, at one point perfect posture, flawless diction, charming and effortless. He didn't mention Seraphina by name until the final sentence. She sat beside him, lips painted, hair pinned up back straight like a ballerina in a jewelry box, but her eyes looked glassy, far away. I watched him lean over and whisper something in her ear, hand resting lightly on her waist, but she didn't react. Just nodded, then stared at her plate. When she finally did glance around the room, her eyes found mine. I offered a small smile. She looked away. I chewed through the rest of the meal with the tightness of a man trying not to bite his tongue. Everything about this place was orchestrated, every word, every movement, every seating chart. It wasn't a celebration. It was a display. And Seraphina was the centerpiece, not a bride, an offering. I didn't know what Nathaniel had whispered in her ear, but I knew that whatever it was, she hadn't liked it. And tomorrow, when she walked down the aisle in front of all these strangers, I wasn't sure she'd be walking there freely. The sky was too blue, the kind of cloudless, picture-perfect day that photographers dream about and real people grow suspicious of. A string quartet played something slow and floral while guests shifted in white wooden chairs on the trimmed lawn overlooking the valley. White petals were scattered down the aisle like someone had poured money over grass and called it love. I sat in the third row, right side, not quite close enough to see the altar clearly, but close enough to see how everyone else had been placed like pieces on a board. The Vaughns were clustered off to the side near the hedges. The Creeds and their kind bankers, hospital executives, distant relatives with sharp watches and shallow eyes, took the center rows like they owned the air itself. And then she appeared. Seraphina walked slowly down the aisle, her arm tucked into our father's. Her dress shimmered in the sun, some gauzy thing that looked like it cost more than my car. She didn't look around, didn't smile. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and she never once met Nathaniel's eyes as she approached him. The officiant welcomed everyone, spoke about commitment and partnership, said things that rang hollow in the breeze. Then came the vows. Nathaniel's were polished, just long enough, just emotional enough. Something about destiny and legacy. The guests nodded, impressed. Serafina took the cue to speak, but her voice caught after the first sentence. She paused, tried again, then faltered. A soft murmur rippled through the guests. Nathaniel leaned toward her, voice low but sharp. "Get it together." She blinked fast, visibly shaken. He stepped back, turned to the crowd with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "Well, she might not be able to string two words together, but I'm sure she'll clean up nicely at the mansion." Laughter, scattered unsure. Then louder in a tone that left no room for misinterpretation. "Trash in a white dress is still trash." Gasps, actual gasps. Time slowed. Serafina's face went white. My mother gripped her clutch with both hands. My father looked down at his shoes. Then Nathaniel looked straight at me. "And you," he said almost casually, "the brother who lives in a shoebox and builds houses he can't afford to buy. You're a failure, too. Guess it runs in the family." I stood before I realized I'd moved. Serafina turned, tears breaking loose, and ran. She didn't make it far, just to the edge of the tent, through a side flap, disappearing behind a row of hedges. I followed, ignoring the murmurs, the eyes, the dead silence in our row. I found her in a small garden room, glass walls filtering in sunlight. She was hunched over a chair veil, tossed to the floor, sobbing silently. Celeste Creed stood across from her, calm and crisp, holding a stack of papers. "She needs a moment," I said. "She needs to sign this," Celeste replied, voice even. "It's standard. A formality. We can't delay." I stepped closer and glanced at the top page. It wasn't a formality. It was a trap. Serafina, still shaking, took the pen in her hand, but couldn't hold it steady. "You want to be part of this family?" Celeste said softly. "You do things our way." I looked down at my sister, then at the contract, then at Celeste's perfectly painted lips. No one had moved to stop this. Not our parents. Not Nathaniel. No one. So it would have to be me. I took the papers from Celeste's hand without asking. She didn't stop me, probably assuming I'd hand them back once I saw how standard they were. But the first paragraph said everything. In the event of divorce, Serafina forfeited all claims to shared property. No alimony, no access to business assets, no financial support of any kind. Clause after clause carved her out of the life they were inviting her into. This wasn't a prenup. It was a muzzle, a leash. Serafina's shoulders trembled beside me, her makeup streaked, and her fingers gripping the pen like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She wasn't even reading it, just staring at the spot where her name was supposed to go. Celeste stepped forward again. "We don't have time for dramatics. This is for her protection as well." I looked up at her, the picture of composure in high heels and judgment. Then back at Serafina. I knelt beside her, put a hand on her arm. "You don't have to sign this." "She does," Celeste said, voice sharp now. "Or there is no wedding." "Good," I said. And I stood. I didn't yell, didn't snap. I simply lifted the contract and tore it in half. Then again, and again, until it was confetti on the polished floor. Celeste gasped. Not loudly, but like the air had been pulled from her lungs. "What have you done?" she hissed. I ignored her, turned to Serafina, and offered my hand. She stared at it for a beat, uncertain. Then she took it. We walked together through the glass room, through the hedges, and back toward the ballroom. Inside, the music had shifted to something slow and graceful. People were drinking again, eating cake, pretending they hadn't just witnessed a collapse. Nathaniel stood near the cake table, laughing with someone. When he saw us, his smile froze. I didn't hesitate. I walked Serafina to the center of the room and let go of her hand just long enough to take a step forward. "Excuse me," I said loud enough to cut through the chatter. "If I could have your attention." Conversations stopped. Heads turned. A few guests exchanged wary glances. "This isn't a wedding," I said, voice steady. "It's a transaction, and my sister is not for sale." Silence stretched like a wire across the room. Nathaniel's face twisted anger or disbelief, I couldn't tell. Celeste emerged from the back, her heels clicking like accusations. But no one said a word. I took Serafina's hand again. We turned and walked toward the exit under the crystal chandelier, past the perfect flower arrangements and the photographers pretending not to shoot us. The resort doors opened into clean mountain air. Cold, bracing, real. Serafina clutched my arm. Her grip was tight, but her steps were steady. We didn't speak until we reached the car. Back home, everything felt smaller. The apartment, the sounds, even the light. But maybe that was just the shift inside me, a hollow left behind by what I'd torn apart and what hadn't yet taken shape. Serafina slept for most of the first 2 days. Her body folded into the couch, her hand unconsciously resting over her stomach. It was on the third night just after dinner that she told me. We were sitting in silence, plates still on the table, the television humming in the background. She didn't look at me when she said it, just stared into her cup of tea and said, "I'm 10 weeks along." I didn't speak right away. I wanted to make sure I heard her clearly. She finally looked up. "Nathaniel doesn't know." I nodded slowly. "Do you want to keep it?" Her fingers curled around the mug. "Yes." I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. "Then we figure it out." She exhaled shakily, like she hadn't allowed herself to believe she'd be met with anything but fear. "I'll protect you," I said. "You and the baby, no matter what." She smiled, faint but real. For the first time since Asheville, I saw her face light with something close to relief. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I opened my laptop and searched for every article post and archived mention I could find of Nathaniel Creed. There were dozens glowing profiles, charity gala snapshots, glossy interviews. He was everywhere, and he looked clean. Too clean. I posted a message anonymously on a regional forum under a fake name. It was short, vague, careful. Looking for anyone who knew Nathaniel Creed during his university years. Anonymous tips, welcome. Private messages only. I didn't expect anything to come of it. But 2 days later, someone responded. The message was brief and unsigned. "I have what you're looking for. Meet me." No cops, no names. They sent an address and a time-some coffee shop in Winston-Salem, just far enough to make me think twice. I went anyway. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-20s, with a face that had seen more than her age should allow. She didn't introduce herself, just slid a small USB drive across the table and said, "I tried to report him once. His family buried it, settled everything, but I kept the files." Inside were screenshots of messages, aggressive, manipulative, unmistakably Nathaniel's. A voice recording his voice, threatening consequences if she told anyone. A statement typed and dated from her time at university. I don't want anything she said before I could ask. Just don't let him do it again. I thanked her, tucked the drive into my jacket pocket, and left before anyone could see us together. At home, Serafina was asleep on the couch, one hand still resting protectively over her stomach. I sat at my desk and stared at the USB. What I held in my hand could burn a legacy to the ground. I didn't rush it. I knew one wrong move could give them time to hide again, to twist the truth like they always had. So I started with Jake, a friend of mine from college who now worked as a journalist for a mid-sized outlet with a history of going after bigger fish than they should. He didn't flinch when I showed him the drive. "I've seen worse," he said. but not with someone this connected. Can you run it? I asked. He nodded. If it checks out, and from a first glance it does, it's going everywhere. A week later it did. Heir to hospital chain, accused of harassment hidden cases unveiled. The headline hit the top of the homepage on a Monday morning and lit up within hours. The screenshots were real. The recordings were unmistakable. The timeline tight and damning. Jake's team had verified every line, every date, every name. There were other women, other whispers. My message had opened more doors than I expected. By noon, the story was national. The Creed family released a statement calling the article a calculated smear campaign and Nathaniel a victim of targeted defamation. Celeste gave a short interview with a stiff jaw and trembling hands. She called the evidence fabricated, but she never said the name of the woman who gave it to me. She didn't dare, but the public didn't buy it. Within days, board members began distancing themselves from the Creed hospitals. 2 investors dropped out of a pending expansion. A quiet investigation began into how many settlements had been signed and sealed behind closed doors. The brand, the gloss, the name. It all started to rot in the sunlight. At home, Serafina didn't ask for updates. She didn't want to know the details, just the outcome. She poured her energy into small things, painting again, opening commissions online, shipping out prints from our kitchen table. Her laugh returned slowly shy at first, like it was testing the air. 3 months later, the baby came. A boy. We named him Miles. Serafina asked me to be on the birth certificate. She didn't want Nathaniel's name anywhere near it. I signed the paperwork and later the adoption papers. Legal binding, no turning back. I was his father in every way that mattered. We didn't have much, but we had peace. The days were long and quiet. Bottles and bills and bedtime stories. Sometimes I still heard Celeste's voice in my head, reminding me that I didn't belong in their world. She was right. I didn't belong in it. I destroyed it. That winter, after the baby had fallen asleep and Serafina was sketching by the window, I sat at my desk and wrote the story. Not the version Jake printed. My version. Quiet, raw, unnamed. I posted it anonymously to a forum buried beneath headlines and hashtags. Silence protects predators. Truth protects people. I hit publish and shut the laptop. This world isn't short on power-hungry men, but I won't let my sister ever live under one again.